I think we do have a good connection with our previous speakers, and I think that you'll find that as we talk about PEDv and African swine fever. But the real link is that we're trying to take the message to the local level, to the actual behavioral level. And I think that's where Elizabeth and Scott and Deanna and I have a common message. And I'll start with this quotation. Anton Chekhov said, "Don't tell me the moon is shining. Show me the glint of moonlight in broken glass." In other words, how do we tell the story in a way that we can inspire behavioral change? In our case, at the worker level. The people who are coming onto that farm every day or every 30 days and having to shower in, shower out, and take care of that animal, and to be motivated to A, believe the science, and B, to make that a part of their life. So that's our goal, was to try to create messages that would inspire behavioral change and improve biosecurity. With that background in mind, we'll go ahead and get started.
Great, wonderful. Of course, it's part of the grant project. We all know about the PEDv case, but what we'd like to do is show you one of the things most recently that we have done is we've tried to put together a training video so that the key spokespersons who are trying to motivate the farm worker level folks to actually inspire them to engage in the appropriate biosecurity practices. And so we're going to show a few little snippets of that. And what we do is we have a model that we have been developing and refining for about 20 years now. That's the IDEA model for effective instructional risk and crisis communication. And we frame the video training session around that, and we will frame our talk today around that. But we'll try to interject some of the various things that have informed our work over the last, 3.5 years working on the PEDv.
Just so you know, we submitted this model to the Journal of Applied Communication.
In the spring of 2013, the deadly virus began invading American hog farms.
The pigs looked perfect, nursing on the sow, just born. Within 12 hours, they were all dead.
The virus was porcine epidemic diarrhea virus, also known as PEDv, a known virus in Asia but unknown to the U.S. By March of 2014, the diarrhea virus had reached Kansas, spreading from one state to 33 states in less than 12 months. And most alarming, even farms with high levels of biosecurity like this one were becoming infected. And across America, hog farmers were losing 100,000 baby hogs each week.
Okay, since I accidentally made it go, you want to...
No, this is a model that we've been developing. We'll talk through the phases of it, and we'll talk through why we're presenting it in the way that we are with these videos to try to be compelling for viewership and how we've tested this model. But we did submit this to the Journal of Applied Communications, which is the ACE organization, the Ag Communicators Organization's flagship journal, and it did get Article of the Year because they were motivated by the research that we were coming up with a very simple model that, based on our examination and our message testing, was effective. So we're bringing to you that good news, and we're thankful for this opportunity because we see every chance we get to speak in front of an audience, as particularly agricultural-based audience, as us getting the word out.
And our challenge that we feel really good about is that we know that everybody is experts in different kinds of science. What we bring to the table is the risk communication science, but can we simplify the model so that somebody who's not schooled in risk communication science could actually use and employ the model effectively to create their messages?
And I think that's why we've been successful in that when we developed the model and submitted this article, it was an interdisciplinary team of people who are animal scientists, veterinarians, and a variety of different disciplines, ag economists, all work together to come up with these ideas that went into the process.
Mm-hmm. And so the model is an acronym for IDEA, the IDEA model. Again, we want something that's simple for people to recall. Oh yeah, the IDEA model. And it has 4 components in it: internalization, distribution, explanation, action. If the message addresses aspects of each of these components, it will be effective in terms of motivating people to engage in the appropriate behavior. Very simply, internalization is something motivating them to attend to the message. We're in an information-saturated world, right? So we have to get their attention. Something has to call their attention to it, that there's how am I affected, or the people that I care about affected and how. Distribution, the D stands for distribution, and that's which channel or channels will best reach the target populations that I'm trying to reach. Different people are more likely to be drawn to different messages sent in different ways. Explanation, E, what is happening and why. And the fourth component is action, specific action steps of what am I supposed to do or what am I not supposed to do for the care and well-being of those I'm trying to protect.
And this may sound like, well, gosh, that all makes sense. It's common sense. But we did content analyses of several disease outbreaks and the coverage of those outbreaks, including food safety problems for messages communicated to people. And Deanna, was it common sense?
No!
Oh, it was not.
Over and over and over again. Most recently we did the World Health Organization, the Dallas newspapers, and the CDC reaction responses when Ebola transpired in Dallas, Texas. And again and again and again, this is what gets privileged. Explanation, 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 information, information, information. And rarely do we ever get, what am I supposed to do?
Two questions people ask when they see coverage that does not include all four elements is, am I at risk? And what am I supposed to do about it? So anyway, just so we've got evidence to explain that this seems easy, but it's challenging for people to put all these components into one message.
Right, and we've even done some training sessions with animal scientists, actually, and farmers to try to see if they could create a message that has all four components. And again, the action step is the piece that seems to be the most difficult to realize how specific actions need to be included in the message. So in terms of internalization, some of the things over multiple studies in different areas of work, the components that can help get people motivated to listen, to pay attention, and to compassion. If somebody has just lost 150 baby piglets on their farm, the spokesperson has to start with a statement of compassion. And this actually wasn't a typical thing, but it's become much more typical and commonplace. But back in the anthrax case, it was only that 20, 25 years ago, very rarely did spokespersons say our hearts and prayers go out to the victims and their families. It wasn't part of the message. So it has really changed. Personal impact. To what degree am I likely to be impacted, right? Scott talked about 14 days for African swine fever, right? Then it skyrocketed? Yeah, that's a personal impact statement. We only got 14 days to get this going well. Proximity. We have discovered time and time again that people want to see a map. In that opening video clip, you saw a map of all the places their PEDv was had been reported. People want to see a map. We did a bunch of work with the USGS on earthquake early warning and about designing messages content for a phone app if a large magnitude intensity earthquake was going to hit. And there was a big debate and argument among the group about whether or not we needed to have a map on that app. And so we had to we message tested for that because, you know, it's only going to vibrate and ring if you're in that vicinity, that area, so you don't need a map. Overwhelmingly, people want the map. We did study after study on that. Timeliness. How much time do I have? How much time can I expect I have? And exemplars. Exemplification theory suggests that exemplars can also tune people into a message. Short, evocative words, phrases, images, sounds that perk their interest, their curiosity. All of those things are things that can help get me to attend to the message and realize.
Just a quick example on internalization. This is, just to give you a personal note, we were in Senegal when they had their first case of Ebola. It turned out to be their only case, but there were questions about whether Ebola was going to spread in Senegal. And when we were home, they gave us a countdown. Deanna found a countdown. She was counting down the days till she knew the timeless that she would that if she didn't have Ebola by then, she wasn't going to get it.
When we returned home, yes.
So then she announced that. She said, one more day and I'm Ebola-free, and then the CDC and World Health Organization extended it and added another 30 days. That was funny. To me, that was funny.
That was funny.
But it was
painful. So then I had to start a new countdown.
And of course, Senegal turned out to not be at as great a risk as we thought at one point. So.
Oh, now this is a little clip from another little clip from the story, and this is going to feature internalization.
Our story began on March 24th, I believe it was. It was a Sunday afternoon. I was here just checking on the ventilation because it was a little bit warm that day. I went into one farrowing room and saw a litter that was scouring or had diarrhea, and I thought, well, crud. So I, treated those pigs, went home, came back the next morning, 6:30 the next morning. We had over 100 litters scouring or with diarrhea.
It was a ghastly disease, and while adult hogs could recover, the baby hogs had almost no chance. Dr. Steve Dreetz at Kansas State joined the race to find answers and new tactics for farmers.
This is a virus, so antibiotics are not going to be effective. One of the researchers calculated that a thimbleful of this virus could infect every pig in the U.S.
It was a disease, an outbreak that was now a runaway train of death for the farms that breed the country's supply of pork.
They were just covered in diarrhea, and they were laying on the sows trying to warm themselves because their core body temperatures were decreasing. And you would have perfectly healthy pigs born, nursing a sow, and 12 hours later they were all dead.
So you heard timeliness from one night to the next morning, compassionate story, the pictures, the visuals, the exemplification, and a runaway train wreck. What evocative phrases? Oh, that's not what I don't know why I did that. We're okay.
Talk a lot about distribution and how we can help people get the message. So we talk about two things here. One, how do we get that message to producers? How do we best get that message to extension workers that want to share it? How do we get that message to on-site workers in the barns themselves? And so these are questions we ask ourselves and adapt the message. The other point is message convergence. We look for consistency and collaboration so that we get a consistent and shared message. And this was really one of the strengths in the PEDv response, is the way that various organizations affiliated with the swine industry came together and in record time produced the research and messaging necessary to help bring to help heighten biosecurity and reduce the impact of at least to shorten the duration of the disease. So we're going to talk more about that at the end, but I wanted to...
Yeah, next slide actually. But yes, multiple sources, multiple agencies all saying a similar message. That way, if there is some counter misinformation out there, people tend to look for the convergence, the similar messages across channels and agencies.
And that's based on repeated studies. We find that, as Deanna just said, that when there is agreement among trusted sources, that tends to outweigh those competing stories, and they're represented by empty circles. So bad science can be stood out by agreement and a consistent message among multiple trusted sources.
What we discovered with the research that we did on the PEDv case is that in terms of distribution, there were the networks. It was more than just networks of experts from across disparate, diverse agencies and units talking together. There's another theory that is called a community of practice, and we argue that that group of people, that very disparate, heterogeneous group of people with different expertise, functioned as a community of practice.
And that's an important point, because the way that community of practice came together to deal with PEDv is important to us. We want to see its portability. So
yes, okay. And so, just a brief thing about what a community of practice is and does. A community of practice exists either within or across organizations. With the PEDv case, we discovered that indeed there were people from within organizations but crossing over organizations. They collectively generate and share knowledge through best practices, as well as highlight challenges, and different players at the table have different expertise that they can inform the others about that shared knowledge, right? There are things that different players know. The COPs are often productive for collaboratively solving these difficult problems and fostering positive change.
So you can see clearly how these aspects function and were important in the PEDv crisis.
So it's more than networking, right? Okay. There are also communicative elements of CO, communities of practice.
When we talk about mutual engagement, we're talking about complete collaboration. In the PEDv case, it was the research and the interpretation and the application of the information was going on simultaneously. As we interviewed multiple parties who were involved in the PEDv response, they talked about the phone calls that took place on a regular. Were any of you involved in those? The phone calls, updates on PEDv? Yep. Getting that information, sharing information, getting update, then taking that information to your circles. So fantastic shared repertoires. This was coming up with best practices. How are we going to treat this thing? Sharing a consistent message on how to respond. And then the third element is negotiation of a joint enterprise, and that is that the group as a whole participated in consensus decision making. And all of these things were evident. We didn't go through the details of our methodology, but we did a series of interviews, observations, looked at materials that were extant from the event, and these are all consistent factors.
So we believe that the PEDv case serves as an exemplar of a community of practice that actually made the results more positive more quickly. And our results, we interviewed 13 swine experts from across different areas of the industry.
All of whom were central in developing the PEDv response. And
we argue 11 out of the 13 talked about the collaboration, that it was so important. And remember, we just said a COP to be effective is collaborative over disparate, heterogeneous players. And then they did actually get convergence. They did actually send out the similar message because they were collaborating so well, regardless if it was a veterinarian telling it to a local farmer or if it was the USDA telling it to the animal scientists or it was the ag extension agents talking to the veterinarians.
And we have, in terms of these strategies, they'll look very familiar, but the point that came out very early in our interviews is that these clear elements of biosecurity were not being performed at their highest levels. And so, although a consistent message is what we look for in a community of practice, what we began to notice was a divergent message. In other words, the swine industry and the collaborating parties had to communicate their own divergent message. In other words, to get people to stop believing that existing biosecurity was sufficient, because it wasn't. For example, just alone the amount of the number of references that we received in our research about improving line of separation, that alone, just on the farm itself, was remarkable, because it really came to show that the existing practices had gaps in many farms. And I understand that there were ways that this virus was able to penetrate even the best farms with the best biosecurity, but nevertheless there were a lot of lax behaviors in biosecurity that had to be recognized and overcome.
So, drawing again from what we learned from the folks in the research and where we think it needs to be taken from there to this next level, communication is everything came out very, very big, but all of the interviewees talked about the pre-established networks that were already in existence in the industry, so that people already had a relationship with each other and had a way to communicate with each other. But we argue that, and Tim mentioned this already, the weekly conference calls to keeping everyone in the loop and everyone know whatever little more information somebody in one of these different groups might have discovered. Whoops. And they were distributed also, those consistent messages in multiple different channels. And one of the things that we've discovered is that sometimes people think erroneously that Facebook or Twitter, for example, is the best channel to reach everybody. It's not the best channel, because only like 10% of the population has a Twitter account, and even fewer of them actually use Twitter. How many of you have a Twitter account? Yeah, see, how many of you that have a Twitter account actually look at it every day? Yeah. See, that's the case in point. So that multiple channels, again, the PEDv industry was doing a good job with that. and message convergence. They had the pre-crisis alliance with one another. They had communication specialists in the room with the scientists, which is really important because to translate the science in a way that a non-scientific public is going to be able to understand it. Yeah. So that's distribution. The third component of the idea model is explanation. And explanation has to do with source credibility. And one of the things that's the best practice for making sure that people will attend to the message and actually be motivated to engage in the behavior, the desired behavior, is it needs different people see different sources as credible, right? So we can't just say if it comes from the USDA, everybody's going to see it as credible, right? Some people want to hear it from their veterinarian, right? Some people want to hear it from the farmer down the road, right? And so it has to be a variety of sources. And you'll see that even in the video so far, we've had a farmer talking, and we've had ag extension specialist talking, Steve Dritz, multiple sources. A second piece of explanation is that the science and information has to be accurate as we know at the time, but it also has to be translated in a way that's intelligible. And this is a real challenge because we all have our own lexicon for our scientific expertise, and it's very difficult to translate, to think, this is the most precise, exactly what I mean is this word, but if the people that you're trying to reach, the local farmers on the ground, right, the workers, don't understand what that is, you fail, right? This sounds like common sense, but it's a very, we found it in whenever we work with scientists in a variety of different disciplines, that's the biggest piece that's challenging. It's just like pulling teeth. But I don't want to say that. It feels like it's watering it down, but if they don't get it, you failed. Yeah. So that intelligible translation is extremely important. Yes, Tim? Okay. Okay, so this is a little bit of the training video again, maybe.
But more important steps were needed.
Of explanation.
But more important steps were needed. Farmers needed to isolate themselves from the chain of infection. Dr. David Newman was on the front lines in North Dakota as the disease jumped from farm to farm and state to state.
PEDv was a whole new beast to this game, and we lost 9 million young baby pigs in a very short period of time. And that's a tough lesson for us to learn.
But the lesson was to create new hard lines of separation between the outside world and the inside of a farrowing barn.
We learned then that being vigilant all the time was critical, not just at a time of being challenged with animal health, but really getting in there and understanding where your feed supply comes from, who's hauling your pigs, where are the trucks going? Where are the humans going that work for you?
As Newman suggests, farmers were recognizing they need a wider view of biosecurity steps.
And the fourth component of the idea model is that specific actionable instructions. In order to be effective, these instructions need to be very specific. What do I do? When do I do it? How do I do it? Right? And modeling, Bandura, right? If we can see it, if we can see what we're supposed to be doing, it makes it clearer the specific action we're supposed to do. And we're talking about risk. We're talking about a preparation so that to avoid infecting a farm with PEDv, for example. And in response, well, if there is an infection on a farm, how do we keep lines of separation open? Yeah.
And again, to circle back to how we began and Scott and Elizabeth's conversations earlier, we're trying to change behavior, and so this is the ultimate point. We've tried message testing where we emphasized action and diminished explanation and diminished internalization because we thought, well, maybe that's all we really need, and people will reason their way to why. It does not work. It has to be in collaboration. Does that start to make sense? People need to be inspired to understand that these actions, even if we show evidence that this action will help, they have to know that their behavior, it's their behavior that contributes to an overall action process that diminishes risk.
Right. Action without internalization, then they'll gradually stop doing the behavior, or they'll try to find a workaround to do the behavior, because why am I going to do all this shower in, shower out, for example, if they don't have that internalization? Why? Why does it matter?
So one of my students said, so yeah, if you don't have action, it's like dough without yeast. So I don't know. Does
Okay.
that work for you? I don't know.
Okay, and a little snippet from illustrating action.
Newman knows the issue well. He's not only a veterinarian and animal science professor, he is also a hog farmer and is vice president of the National Pork Board. He helped write the new rules.
We're going to try to create an instant break line of separation on biosecurity. So we require all personnel entering that barn to come all in to the facility with a shower in, shower out facility.
Which means, as we see in this demonstration video, all outside clothing and material remains outside, and workers redress in farm-supplied clothing on the inside.
Trucks are a huge issue. We need trucks to get feed on and off the farms to feed mills. We need trucks to get the pigs transported from facility to facility. So cleaning trucks is extremely crucial, and we learned a lot in PEDv about cleaning trucks.
In addition to cleaning trucks, new guidelines call for disinfecting the birthing areas. And feed is now more carefully monitored. No issue has become too small for hog producers to ignore in the face of old or new disease threats.
Good biosecurity protocols will prevent any, disease threat or any unknown disease threat that you have. So that's the benefit of the return on investment for biosecurity is they're non-specific. It helps you deal with the unknowns.
And the unknowns may be around the corner, or at least around the world. A new disease, African swine fever, is a threat and a story for another day. A story we can't risk repeating.
It's nothing I'll ever forget, and anybody that went through it will never forget it.
Not forgetting and keeping up a biosecure line of defense may be the only thing hog farmers can count on to keep them safe. For the news, I'm Ron Blom in Central Kansas.
That's the big lesson for us is what we want to understand is can you transport those behaviors that a community of practice comes to embrace in one crisis, PEDv, and to what extent can we transport that to African swine fever? And we use the word transport instead of transfer because transfer suggests that you can like transferring funds. If I have $1,000 in one fund and I want to transfer it to another, when it gets there, I have $1,000. But when we transport things, there's a process that we go through, and there's an intermediary to get it there, and how do we make sure that we transfer it? And something is always lost, and perhaps more importantly, something always has to change so that we can adapt to whatever idiosyncrasies there are or nuances to that new disease, that new crisis.
And what's exciting, that's kind of our next steps of what we're going to be working on, is that certainly the lessons learned in PEDv will remain lesson learned for resilience in PEDv, but how valuable would it be is if it could be transported to be useful in other disease situations.
And that's why we're excited and we're taking pictures all through Scott's presentation.
Yes, absolutely. So that's the idea model for effective instructional risk and crisis communication, what we've learned so far in terms of the case analysis with the PEDv situation and how we're next going to try to transport it to HPAI and African swine
and we're in the
fever.
process of making all these materials that we generate readily available and downloadable on a website that we're working with Julie to develop and make available to anybody who wants to use it for training or any other purpose.
Right.